Welcome back to ICG's demo series. Today we're going to cover the first of three parts of the vendor onboarding process, the new vendor request. We'll look at three examples that illustrate how ICG can customize your vendor onboarding process to fit the needs and requirements of your company. The first example's primary goal was to collect information necessary to set up a vendor for AP purposes. Therefore, their new vendor request process was very simple. To access the new vendor request page, go to the hamburger menu in the top left corner, and since this client uses SAP as their ERP, they named their process Master Data Workflow, and within there, click Invite Onboarding Users. For this company, the information needed is pretty minimal. There are no conditional questions and only one dropdown. This information is passed along to the packet once it is created for the vendor. With all of the information filled out, the requester hits Send Invitation, and someone with an approver role for this process must review the request and approve it. Our second example is slightly more complicated because the client's main goal for vendor onboarding was to provide a tool that facilitated the creation of a new process for vendor compliance and governance. To get to the new vendor request page, click the hamburger menu in the top left-hand corner, and under Onboarding Requests, click Create New Vendor Request. The initial vendor contact information is similar to our first example, but after that, further information is required. This information includes the vendor class type dropdown, which impacts field behavior in the packet, anticipated annual spend, which may trigger an additional step in the overall process, and a conditional question for informational purposes. Is this a unique product you cannot get from an existing vendor? If I answer yes to this question, I need to answer an additional question. The requester's information is already filled in based on the logged-in user, but some of it can be edited. There is also a drop-down menu for internal information, as well as a place to upload contracts. Once all of this is filled out, click Submit. Another difference from the initial example is that if an internal user is assigned the role of both a requester and an approver, the request is automatically approved, with no need for someone to search for the request and approve it separately. This feature is customizable depending on your organization's needs. Our third example is similar to the second, with a few more questions and conditionals. This is because, as a distributor, this client had tens of thousands of vendors, a mature vendor onboarding process, and wanted to make sure to have a consolidated tool to facilitate standardization and collection of vendor information. To access vendor onboarding requests, go to the hamburger menu and under Onboarding Requests, click VOB Submit VA Request. Here, the first thing that we see is that there are different types of requests. This means this company differentiates between new vendor requests, reinstatements, and renewals. Clicking on reinstatements or renewals creates an extra field, Existing AP Vendor Number, and the approval process is slightly different. The vendor information section is similar to the other two examples, but product information is more extensive. Finally, we have a place to upload documents as well as to add comments if needed. Once complete, hit Submit. In each example, we briefly touched on the request approval process, but now we'll show an example. Under Onboarding Requests, click VOB Request Approval. This opens a search function with a queue of submitted approval requests. Search by request ID, type, company name, assigned user, or pending. Additionally, you can sort the requests. Once you find the request you want to approve, click it. This is the information provided by the requester. You can change information, add documents, or take the following actions. Clicking the timeline button shows you all of the actions taken for this request so far. You can also add a note or pen the request. If there's an issue, it can be routed to another approver or back to the requester. Finally, you can reject or approve the request. If rejected, requesters have a queue for returned requests. If approved, we move on to the next step of the vendor onboarding process. The vendor receives an email to sign up for the portal so they can complete the packet. And that wraps it up for the initial step of vendor onboarding, the internal new vendor request and approval process. To learn more about the next step, please watch our video on vendor packets.